Officer O'Brien believes differently, at least in point of time.
The 20s and 30s spawned a different, brainier, more reckless, more ruthless type of criminal. He was armed with weapons, cars, and even airplanes of a much more sophisticated nature than any police department was allowed by their rather stringent budgets. Because of this, they were many times able to outperform the police. This condition eventually brought into being the FBI, the G-man of the 30s, and it also brought into being Alcatraz, as some place had to be built or found which was strong enough to hold these people, and Alcatraz was a natural. Their money, connections, ruthlessness, and viciousness made ordinary penitentiaries utterly impractical. Remember, these men all had prior records and were well known. It took an Alcatraz to hold such men, and just as importantly, to hold their gangland friends, and in some cases, their relations out. As I view the picture in retrospect, there is a great deal on the affirmative side and very little on the negative side. Probably the most negative was the financing and lack of recreation and education. But in the overall picture, in answer to the question, was Alcatraz needed? Was it a necessity? I can only answer, you're darn right it was.
Former public enemy number one, Alvin Karpus, doesn't appear overly impressed by the tough guy reputations of the residents of Alcatraz.
Well, I'll tell you what I found about Alcatraz anyway, and I think this goes for a lot of those places. Usually these guys, when they're looking for trouble, they finally run into some guy that is looking for the same thing, and when they do, something's got to give. You know, there's a lot of people killed there in Alcatraz in one manner or another, and they had the thing flooded at one time with psychotics. They should have actually been in the medical center, see, but these other prisons would recommend that they go to Alcatraz just to get them out, the guy out of their hair. So now they would wind up out there, and hell, and like I say, some of them were real paranoid, you know, and they'd walk up to a guy and say, "What are you watching me for? What are you looking at me for?" and things like that, and it would create a bad, tense situation around the place.
Publicity has painted Al Capone as a lonely outsider, unpopular with his fellow cons, possibly living in fear of his life.
He was all right. He was a very nice guy. I've read so many different stories about his, the way he was in the prison and that he wasn't liked. Well, let's get down to it. You find a guy that everybody likes. There's something wrong with the guy himself, probably. But all in all, he was all right there, and just like he was all right before he got in prison. He did his time, and nobody ever heard him complaining or anything. And they gave him a bad way to go there because, well, just like they did me, because of the people in Washington, and nobody wanted to say that they were being easy on some guy, you know, like myself or Capone or Kelly. And
George Machine Gun Kelly was another who made many a front-page headline. Was he also easy to get along with?
Kelly, you know, he had read so much of that propaganda about himself before he was arrested. He got to believe in himself, I think, a little bit. And it would seem like he never tired of telling about all these escapades, you know. And he had lived a rather fascinating life. And the guy, the only thing he was a little inclined to talk about things that he actually hadn't did. For one time, he was describing a hell of a sensational thing. I got to think, what the hell is he talking about? I was on this thing, and I don't remember him being around there, you know.
I'm a great admirer of San Francisco, which was so close to you on the Rock. Must have been painful to be so near and yet so far from all that life and gaiety.
I tell you what, they couldn't have designed a thing, you know, to make it worse for you. And oddly enough, the isolation block there, you could see San Francisco better than from the main block. The main block, you could only about 30 cells where you could sit, and they used to be choice cells. Why them guys wanted to punish themselves, I don't know. They even go to the extent we used to steal a lens out of the x-ray machine in the hospital and stuff, and a guy would grind down the lens and make telescopes. Well, you could look right in them joints over on Fisherman's Wharf with this, you know.
In spite of the rigid security on the Rock, the natural hazards of the bay, It's known that a number of men became desperate enough to risk the tremendous odds in all-out bids to escape, although most of them were recaptured or drowned. Both Officer O'Brien and Mr. Carpus recall nearly successful attempts, and one party had a chilling change of heart, thus ending the shortest escape attempt on record.
Yeah, Giles, or Giles, as I know him, was assigned to the crew that worked on the dock. And at that time, during the war, World War II, Army uniforms were sent to Alcatraz to be cleaned and repaired and laundered. Over a period of time, our friend Giles had managed to secret a uniform. Now, this uniform bore the stripes of a staff sergeant, and each time when the boat would land at the dock, the inmates were required to line up along the edge of the dock. And at this time, Giles would take advantage of the 20 or 30 seconds available to him to put a small part of the uniform underneath. So one day, the General Coxey, I believe it was, came in, which was a boat that traveled between San Francisco and Angel Island, stopping at Alcatraz. There was a provost marshal aboard. During the time the boat was tied up at the dock at Alcatraz, which was only a matter of minutes, he noticed a staff sergeant make what was known as a pierhead jump. As the boat pulled away, he said to the officer on the dock, "Who was that staff sergeant that got aboard?" And the officer said, "Staff sergeant? We have no staff sergeants on Alcatraz. We didn't put a staff sergeant on there." And after about 5 seconds thought, the officer called for an immediate emergency count. But by this time, Giles was pretty well along on his way to Angel Island. Of course, he had telephoned Angel Island, and the military police picked up Giles on his arrival. He was possibly the saddest-looking staff sergeant in history. Yeah, I knew Bayless, knew him quite well, in fact, and Bayless did attempt an escape, and it probably was the shortest escape in history. I think that the one thing that we had going for us that day was the temperature of the water, and Bayless found this out when he got in it. And when he found out how cold it was, he immediately turned and headed for the shore.